Robert had built his company from nothing, and now at 52 he stood looking out the window of his corner office on the 20th floor, watching the city come alive in the morning light. His engineering team had spent 3 months working on the prototype for the new mobility device that would help elderly people navigate stairs safely, but something was wrong with the sensor calibration, and 15 of the brightest minds he had ever worked with could not figure out why the device kept malfunctioning. The irony was not lost on him that he was trying to solve a problem for people his own age while feeling more helpless than he had in decades. Margaret had been caring for his 8-year-old daughter Sarah for 2 years now, ever since Robert's wife passed away from cancer, and she had become more than just a nanny. She had become the steady heartbeat of their home. At 68, Margaret moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had raised 6 children of her own and helped countless other families through difficult times, and when she knocked gently on his office door that Tuesday morning, he was grateful for any interruption from his mounting frustration. "Margaret dear, please come in," Robert said, stepping away from the window where he had been staring at nothing for the better part of an hour. She entered carrying a cup of coffee prepared exactly the way he liked it, with just a touch of cream and no sugar, and set it down on his desk with the careful attention she gave to everything in their lives. "Sarah mentioned you have been working late again," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the ease of someone who had earned her place in this family. Robert sank into his chair and rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier each day since Elizabeth died. "We have been trying to solve this problem for months, Margaret, and I am beginning to think it cannot be done," he said, picking up the prototype device from his desk and turning it over in his hands. The device was sleek and modern, designed to attach to handrails and guide people safely up and down stairs using advanced sensors and artificial intelligence, but the sensors kept giving false readings and no amount of programming adjustments seemed to help. Margaret studied the device with the same thoughtful expression she used when examining Sarah's homework or deciding which vegetables looked freshest at the grocery store. "May I see how it works?" she asked, extending her weathered hands. Robert demonstrated how the device was supposed to detect the user's grip and adjust its guidance accordingly, but as always the sensors flickered erratically and gave inconsistent feedback. Margaret held the device quietly for a moment, running her fingers along its surface the way she might examine a piece of fabric before mending it. "You know," she said softly, "this reminds me of when my grandson Tommy was learning to use his first computer mouse." She paused and looked up at Robert with eyes that had seen decades of children struggle with new challenges. He kept gripping it so tightly his little knuckles would turn white and the cursor would jump all over the screen, until one day I noticed he relaxed when I put a small piece of velvet fabric on top of the mouse. The room grew quiet except for the distant hum of the city below, and Robert felt something shift in his understanding, though he could not yet name what it was. Margaret continued, her voice gentle but certain as she examined the device more closely. "Perhaps the problem is not with the sensors themselves but with what they are trying to sense." She turned the device over and pointed to the smooth metal surface where users were supposed to place their hands. "When people are frightened or uncertain, they tend to grip things much tighter than usual and their hands often shake slightly," she said. "My mother lived with us for her final years and I watched her navigate our stairs every day, and I noticed how different her grip was when she felt confident versus when she was worried about falling." Robert leaned forward, feeling the first stirring of help he had experienced in weeks. "The sensors are calibrated for a normal relaxed grip," he said slowly, "but people using this device are likely to be anxious or uncertain." "Exactly," Margaret nodded, "and there is something else." She held up her hands, showing the thin skin and prominent veins that came with age. "Older skin feels different than younger skin, and it responds differently to temperature and pressure." She gently placed her hand on the device and Robert watched the sensors fluctuate wildly, just as they had been doing in all their tests. products. Margaret smiled knowingly and reached into her purse, pulling out a pair of thin cotton gloves, the kind she wore when gardening. She slipped them on and placed her hand back on the device, and this time the sensors gave a steady, consistent reading. Robert stared at the display, unable to speak for a moment as the solution became crystal clear. The sensors need to account for the different tactile properties of aging skin, he whispered, and the emotional state of someone who might be afraid of falling, Margaret added. Within 30 seconds she had identified what 15 engineers with advanced degrees had missed in 3 months of intensive work. That afternoon Robert called his entire engineering team into the conference room and asked Margaret to join them. He had never seen his team so quiet as Margaret explained her observations about how people actually interact with assistive devices when they are feeling vulnerable or uncertain. She spoke about her mother and her neighbors and the dozens of elderly people she had helped over the years, and how their needs were not just technical but deeply human. The engineers listened with a respect that Robert had rarely seen them show for anything outside their field of expertise, and by the end of the meeting they had a completely new approach to the problem. Over the following weeks Margaret continued to consult with the team, sharing insights that came from decades of caring for people rather than studying algorithms. She suggested adding a soft textile covering to the grip area that would feel reassuring to nervous hands, and recommended that the device provide gentle audio encouragement rather than just mechanical guidance. The final prototype was tested with a group of seniors from the community center where Margaret volunteered, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. But more importantly for Robert, the experience had taught him something about the kind of leader he wanted to be and the kind of company he wanted to build. He had spent years surrounded by brilliant people who could solve complex technical problems, but he had forgotten the wisdom that comes from simply paying attention to how people actually live their lives. On the day the device received regulatory approval, Robert stood in his office again looking out at the city, but this time Margaret was beside him holding a framed photo of the first customer testimonial. Mrs. Henderson from down the street had written that the device had given her back her independence and allowed her to stay in the home she had shared with her late husband for 43 years. "Margaret, this never would have happened without you," Robert said. She smiled and patted his arm with the gentle affection she showed Sarah when she was proud of her. "You had all the pieces, Robert," she said. "You just needed someone to help you see them differently." That evening at dinner, Sarah announced that she wanted to be an engineer when she grew up so she could solve problems like her father. "But I also want to be like Margaret," she added, "so I can understand what people really need." Robert looked across the table at Margaret, who was helping Sarah cut her chicken into smaller pieces with the patient attention she brought to everything. He realized that the most important lesson of his career had come not from a textbook or a business school case study, but from watching someone who had spent her life caring for others approach a problem with wisdom earned through decades of simply paying attention. The device went on to help thousands of people maintain their independence and dignity as they aged, and Robert's company became known not just for technical innovation but for designing products that understood the human heart as well as human needs. Margaret continued to work with the company as a consultant, bringing her perspective to every new product they developed, and the engineering team learned to ask different questions about the people who would actually use what they were creating. Years later, when Sarah did indeed become an engineer, she would tell people that she learned her most important lessons not in university but at her kitchen table, listening to her father and Margaret discuss how to build things that truly served people. And Robert never forgot that sometimes the most profound solutions come not from complexity but from the simple wisdom of someone who has spent their life noticing how people actually navigate the world. The story became part of the company's culture, passed down to new employees as a reminder that innovation happens not just in laboratories and conference rooms but wherever people take the time to really see each other and respond with kindness. Margaret's 30-second solution had done more than fix a technical problem. It had reminded everyone involved that the best technology serves not just function but the deeper human need to feel understood and supported. In quiet moments Robert would think about how Elizabeth would have loved Margaret's approach to problem solving and how she would have appreciated the way Margaret helped their family heal, not through grand gestures but through countless small acts of attention and care. The device continued to evolve and improve, but its foundation remained rooted in Margaret's insight that people need more than just mechanical assistance. They need to feel that someone understands their fears and their hopes. And in the end, that understanding made all the difference, not just for the people who used the device but for everyone who learned that the most elegant solutions often come from the deepest wells of human compassion.